Hi, it's Katrina. Get ready to explore the mysteries of ancient civilizations just uncovered. These hidden gems from the past are like puzzles waiting to be solved. We may not know their name, but we are finding a lot of them. So let's jump into 10 civilizations you probably have never heard of. The alien civilization of Southern Africa. In southern Africa, the remains of an enormous metropolis have been discovered. It's causing waves in the archaeological community because some have suggested it is 200,000 years old. Take a look at this satellite image of the site in question. The image was taken above what's supposedly an empty landscape. But it doesn't look empty, does it? There are what appear to be the imprints of circular settlements, each one big enough for around a dozen people, and not a single brick left. These settlements must have been obliterated a long time ago, leaving only scars upon the earth. One of the researchers extremely interested in these ruins is Michael Tellinger. He recently teamed up with local firefighter/pilot Johan Hein. They made a dynamic team because Johan has been flying over the area for years. He had a bird's eye view of the ruins, making him something of an unofficial expert. Johan used his knowledge of the area to help Michael explore the ruins on the ground, taking photographs and collecting evidence. Together, the pair have come to the conclusion that the indentations found in the middle of nowhere across southern Africa are from a forgotten chapter of human history. They were made by a civilization that was lost even before all known civilizations got started. Michael has said the reason the civilization was here was because of the immense gold deposits. There have been hundreds, even thousands of abandoned gold mines discovered across southern Africa. Michael believes the Anunnaki, the Sumerian gods, came from the stars, created the first humans here to mine for gold. The strange circular ruins I just showed you are possibly proof of the Anunnaki gold extracting operation. Now, I know you probably don't want to hear it, but I must burst the Anunnaki bubble. Not everybody agrees with the Anunnaki interpretation. Some experts think the ruins in southern Africa are the remnants of cattle corrals made by the Bantu people when they settled the land in the 13th century. This would make the ruins only 700 years old, not 200,000 years old. What do you believe? I want to hear about it in the comments. The Mound culture of North America. Did you know that Britain was originally ruled by a prehistoric giant named King Albion? Not many people do. Maybe it's true or maybe it isn't. All I can tell you is that it's what 16th century scribe Raphael Holinshed wrote in his book Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Raphael claimed that Albion is the oldest name in Britain, taken from the king of a race of giants ruled thousands of years before Jesus Christ was born. Can you see where I'm going with this? This is a story about how giants used to rule the world, a topic that might need to be taken a lot more seriously. Just save your questions until the end. Marco Polo wrote in the 13th century that giants lived in Zanzibar. He said the giants were so strong they could carry 4 ordinary men like it was nothing, like they were children. Sightings of giants continued in Africa until the 20th century. One of the more recent sightings was made by journalist Glenn D. Kittler. When he visited the Watusi tribe in the Congo, he said most men stood around 8 feet tall. They seemed to be the descendants of biblical giants. The point I want to make is that giants have been spotted from the tip of Patagonia to the white wasteland of Siberia. But today, I want to focus on the mound builders of North America, a lost civilization many Americans don't realize existed, the evidence of them buried under modern cities. The exact history of the mound builders is unknown. Ever since Europeans arrived in America, they've been finding huge earthen mounds, primarily in the Ohio Valley and along the Mississippi River. All evidence points to a culture that built massive ceremonial sites, elite palaces, and sprawling cities for 5,000 years or more. Archaeologists have even begun to separate the mound builders into individual cultures. For example, the Adenas, who lived in southern Ohio between 500 BC and 100 AD, and the Fort Ancient culture, the group responsible for Serpent Mound. They were around from about 1000 to 1750. There may have been different cultures building mounds across America, but they were all supposedly giants. Surviving Native American groups like the Paiute tell stories of red-haired giants, of giant cannibals, and of giants who used to herd mammoths. Yes, woolly mammoths. Native American scholar Vine Deloria Jr. heard stories from elders about the most ancient indigenous groups. They were people who stood more than 8 feet tall and herded mammoths like they were cattle 12,000 years ago. If the Native American legends are to be believed, North America was originally home to a race of giant people. They likely didn't stand 20 feet tall, but evidence does point to a civilization where people stood on average more than 7 feet. If you're interested in learning more about giants, be sure to check out my other recent videos about giant footprints and the giants from Patagonia. The fallen kingdom of Vietnam. One of the greatest kingdoms this world has ever seen lived in the modern nation of Vietnam. Let's start with the city, a sanctuary by the name of My Son. The ruins of this place can be found in the Vietnamese province of Quang Nam, nestled in the thick jungle and surrounded by mountains. The mystical Thu Bon River flows past the busted stone walls of the city, winding its way towards the South China Sea. Although nobody lives in My Son today, it was once the capital of the Champa Kingdom. The site has more than 70 brick and stone temples for worshipping Hindu deities such as Shiva, Krishna, and Vishnu. The Champa themselves appeared in Southeast Asia in the year 192, when the Roman Empire was at its most powerful. Surprisingly, the Champa ruled far longer than our friends the Romans. The Champa dominated South and Central Vietnam up until 1697. That was a reign of 1,500 consecutive years. Why aren't we talking about this civilization more? Their kingdom even outlived the Maya. The Champa didn't just rule, they repelled numerous military advancements by kingdoms that you might be familiar with. The Champa fought the Chinese, the Mongols, and the Khmer. They survived every incursion until the last one. The Champa were also filthy rich. Researchers believe their trade network may have been one of the best in the world. They traded gold, silver, exotic animals, human slaves, and spices. Who did they trade with? Absolutely everybody. From Taiwan to Japan, Malaysia to India, and merchants in the Middle East and North Africa. Here's a shocking piece of information. It's believed Christopher Columbus tried to reach the Champa Kingdom on his 4th and last voyage, but he never made it. How do you think Columbus would have fared against a civilization that even the Mongols failed to conquer? In the end, Champa warriors couldn't defend their borders forever. The Dai Viet, the ancestors of modern Vietnamese, invaded from the north in the 15th century. They went on to sack Vijaya, marking the beginning of the end. What's ironic about their defeat is that they did it to themselves. The Champa had been suffering from civil wars, at one point having 5 different rulers prior to the Dai Viet assault. They had also attacked Angkor, so the Khmer Empire ignored their calls for help. When the Dai Viet invaded their lands, the Champa fell with surprising ease. Here's the most mysterious part of the Lost Kingdom. Even though the Champa were defeated, their people were not. Experts don't know how many of the Champa are left, but they do estimate it's between 400,000 and 1 million people. The modern descendants of those ancient warriors live along the border of Cambodia and Vietnam, speaking either Cham or Khmer. And now for number 7, but first, it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Mountain Life for the super thanks! Thank you so much for watching and for your generous support. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. The prehistoric mystery people of Japan. People were living in Japan 24,000 years ago, and I have proof to back it up. By proof, I'm talking about prehistoric skeletons discovered at a limestone quarry near Naha, which is at the southern tip of Okinawa. They weren't found randomly, but thanks to one extremely diligent businessman. You're not going to believe the lengths this guy went through to find ancient human bones. Seiho Oyama purchased building stone blocks from the Minatogawa quarry. In them, he found a fossilized bone fragment. For the next 2 years, he kept watch at the quarry. I'm sure he wasn't there every single day with binoculars, looking over the shoulders of the workers, but he did spend 2 years keeping his eyes on the site, waiting to find another fossil. I'm sure he spread the word for the workers to tell him if anything came up. In 1968, he saw what he had been waiting to see. Another human bone was found at the quarry, which Oyama took and showed to Professor Hisashi Suzuki at Tokyo University. A team of scientists led by Suzuki then descended on the quarry, conducting digs periodically over the next 10 years. They ended up uncovering 4 full skeletons. It might seem like a lot of work for less than a half a dozen human skeletons, but these skeletons are very important. So important they have the potential to change history. They are among the oldest hominin skeletons ever found in East Asia. Suzuki's team dug the remains out of a vertical fissure in the limestone rock. The skeletons belonged to a pair of males and a pair of females. They were mixed in with 200 fragments of animal bones, mostly from deer and boar. Now I hope you're ready for the gruesome part. These skeletons showed evidence that they had been murdered. Dun dun dun! One of the male skeletons had a perforation in his skull that looked as if it had been made by a spear tip. This poor guy was impaled by his enemy. Suzuki publicly announced that the ancient humans had been murdered, most likely by spears and arrows. Then they had been cannibalized, their bones broken, and their meat cooked into human steaks. The skeletons were then thrown into a pit that was used as a trash dump, which explains why they were found with so many fragments of animal bones. It's about time that I ask a big question. Who were these people buried in the quarry? Was there truly a civilization in Japan 24,000 years ago? There certainly was, only scientists know almost nothing about it. There is no evidence of how advanced their technology was, or if they were primitive Stone Age barbarians. The one defining feature of the Minatogawa people is that they were small. The men were barely about 5 feet tall, while the women were about 4.5 feet tall. They were so short, even by medieval European standards, that they were one step away from being hobbits. Australia's drowned civilization. A lost civilization almost twice the size of the United Kingdom was just discovered off the coast of Australia. Scientists are shocked, saying up to 500,000 people could have lived in the area before it sank to the bottom of the sea 12,000 years ago. Do you know what else happened 12,000 years ago? According to the Bible, that was when God flooded the world to get rid of the Nephilim, the giants of the antediluvian world. It's a little suspicious that 500,000 people may have been wiped out in Australia at the same time by a sudden rise in sea level. Scientists reached their conclusion when they found signs of human life off the coast of Kimberley, on a sunken landmass that connects Australia to New Guinea. It may be underwater now, but it wasn't 2.5 million years ago. The drowned piece of land used to be as dry as a bone, home to a thriving ecosystem. Scientists from a variety of institutes, including the Australian Research Centre for Human Evolution and the University of Sydney, were the ones who recently published this incredible revelation. They measured the sunken landmass as 250,000 square miles. They were able to identify freshwater lakes, rivers, streams, and a saltwater inland sea. All these features are flooded today, but that wasn't always the case. Up until 12,000 years ago, the landmass was abundant enough to sustain an enormous population. It also may have served as a bridge between Australia and New Guinea. By 9,000 years ago, the landmass was underwater. The global sea level rose, forcing the people who lived on the landmass from their homes. Scientists don't know how quickly it happened. There's no way of knowing if entire cities were flooded, killing tens of thousands. Let's just hope the water rose slowly enough that people were able to escape to drier land. As for the cause of the sea level rise, that's a subject of much debate. Most mainstream scientists agree the sea level rose because the polar ice caps melted. But if you're to take the Bible's word for it, God flooded the world. Who's correct, scientists or the Bible? Or could it be a mix of both? The oldest civilization in the Amazon. Just this year, 2024, scientists have found the oldest known civilization in the Amazon jungle. It's a discovery so big that I'm itching to tell you about it. Researchers have quite literally changed the history of Amazonia. It happened in eastern Ecuador. The group of researchers were led by Professor Stephen Rothstein. They combined ground excavations with laser sensors attached to the underside of an airplane to identify the ruins of a humongous city. The city is so old, forgotten for so long, that the jungle almost completely swallowed it. The group had to pry hungry vines off the stones to reveal the remnants of a lost culture. The city has no name. Initial findings suggest it was built 2,500 years before today. That's about 200 years before Alexander the Great set out to conquer the world for the Greeks. I guess actually the Macedonians. Preliminary investigations also suggest people lived within the Amazonian city for about 1,000 years before they fled for unknown reasons. As for how many people it held, it's unclear right now. Scientists don't know if there were 10,000 people inside the walls or 100,000 people. You might be wondering how a single city changes Amazonian history. This isn't just a city. It was, at its height, a thriving metropolis like New York City. The scientific team identified neighborhoods, about 6,000 ancient homes, and plazas. All of these features were connected by a network of roads. These were real roads, just like modern city streets, weaving through the metropolis from one neighborhood to another. Up until this discovery, it was assumed the people of the Amazon only lived in loosely connected villages or were nomadic. Nobody had believed people living in the South American jungle had ever built a city. Sure, there are places like Machu Picchu in Peru and Ciudad Perdida in Colombia, but these weren't true cities. They were more like towns built on rocky outcrops above the jungle, used as ceremonial hubs. To give you some perspective, the Inca city of Machu Picchu, built in 1450, only had about 500 people living in it. This newly found city in Ecuador could have had 100,000 residents. The two cities don't even remotely compare. I should mention that the discovery has been a work in progress. Researchers first got wind of the jungle city in the 1970s. This new investigation, revealing all of these amazing insights, is the result of 25 years of research. But it's been worth it. This mysterious civilization may have been even bigger than the Maya or the Aztec. Yet scientists haven't even come up with a name for them yet. They know absolutely zilch about the culture's traditions, beliefs, economy, or really anything about their history. The secret past of the Xia Dynasty. In China's Henan province, an archaeological revelation is in the process of unfolding. Researchers have uncovered an ancient walled city containing traces of a civilization from the beginning of Chinese history. If you haven't heard of the Xia Dynasty before, you're in for a real treat. The walled city that was discovered is at the edge of the Zhenchui River. Keep in mind that the entire city is gone, buried long ago. Archaeologists only managed to reveal a small chunk of a fortification mound. By small chunk, I'm talking almost 200 feet long and over 100 feet wide. Researchers think the mound was a cornerstone of the city's palace compound. Even without discovering anything else, the foundation block points to an immense amount of wealth and luxury in this forgotten place. Head of the excavation team, Li Bo, believes the city dates back to the Xia Dynasty. While technically China, as a united civilization, has survived more than 4,000 years, its history is broken into individual dynasties. As a more familiar example, ancient Egypt is considered one civilization, yet ancient Egypt can be divided into 31 dynasties over a course of almost 3,000 years. The first ancient Chinese dynasty was the Xia Dynasty, established in 2070 BC. It's the first known government that emerged in China 2 millennia before China would be unified by the first emperor Qin Shi Huang. What is so fascinating about the Xia Dynasty is that historians have a hard time separating myth from legend. Some don't even think it existed. Wait, how could a dynasty not exist? Listen to the tale of how the Xia Dynasty was founded, and then you'll understand. Legend has it that there was a great ruler known as the Yellow Emperor. He rose from the savagery of a tribal confederacy about 4,700 years ago. He established the first government, invented musical instruments, came up with the first Chinese laws, and invented agriculture. Nobody knows what's true and what isn't, because the Yellow Emperor only exists in myth. The Yellow Emperor never died. He attained immortality and rose to heaven, leaving only his clothing and hat to be entombed. His royal clothes were buried within the tomb of the Yellow Emperor, a vast mausoleum that can be found on Qiao Mountain. This is a real place. Generations of emperors have been leaving offerings at the mausoleum for the past 2,500 years. Still, there is no proof that the Yellow Emperor existed. His mausoleum was built 2,000 years after he supposedly ascended to heaven, like Jesus Christ. Who would have thought the first Chinese emperor had the same origin story as the Christian Messiah? Coincidence? The legend goes on to say that when the Yellow Emperor went to heaven, he was succeeded by his grandson, Zhuan-Shu. This was the start of Xia. Things really kicked off after Zhuan-Shu's death, when Emperor Yao took over. Yao began turning tribal villages made of huts into large urban centers. On the other hand, this could all be false. The Yellow Emperor, Yuanshu, Yao, they may have never existed. Many modern Chinese scholars have suggested the entirety of the Xia dynasty was fabricated by the Zhou dynasty between 1046 and 256 BC. The Zhou may have made up the story about the Yellow Emperor and the Xia dynasty to give themselves legitimacy to rule, making themselves seem like they had 2,000 extra years of history behind them. The whole thing is really confusing, even for Chinese historians. It only gets more confusing when archaeologists find stuff like the walled city in Henan province, which dates to the time of the Yellow Emperor's kingdom. Doomsday 2030. Doom is on its way. An asteroid destroyed civilization 13,000 years ago, and now another one is coming. The date of our extinction has been marked as the year 2030. Approximately 12,800 years ago, a humongous comet entered our solar system. It came from somewhere in deep space, spinning through the vastness of the void with no particular destination in mind. It just so happened to get stuck in Earth's orbit. The comet fractured into many fragments, some of them raining down on the planet's surface. 8 of the fragments smashed into the North American ice cap, with others hitting the European ice cap. By ice cap, I mean the huge layers of ice covering the northern hemisphere during the Ice Age. The heat in the impact zones was incredible. The comet fragments were up to a mile wide and hit the ground at somewhere around 60,000 miles an hour. The heat was intense enough to instantly liquidize millions of square miles of ice, causing an unanticipated flood. This is almost certainly the flood talked about in the Bible. It's likely the same flood the Mesopotamians recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's also the same flood that the Egyptians wrote of in hieroglyphics. Everyone on the planet knew about the flood. It was inescapable. The sneaky part is that the Egyptians, Mesopotamians, and Hebrews were not around 13,000 years ago to see it. They didn't witness the flood's devastation firsthand. Rather, they recorded the disaster as it was described to them through generations of oral retelling. Kind of like how I'm telling you about it now, 13,000 years after the fact. Even though no civilization you or I have ever heard of suffered the floodwaters, there was one that apparently did. Controversial author and researcher Graham Hancock said an advanced civilization inhabited the planet when the comet fragments caused the flood. They weren't individual civilizations, but instead one huge global civilization that was destroyed beyond repair. Graham Hancock is the one who claims the comet was responsible for the flood. The whole idea of the comet hitting the poles and melting the ice is Graham's. Many people consider him deluded, crazy, and spouting nonsense for attention and money. But he isn't alone in his assessments. There is proof that what he's saying makes sense. One of the best pieces of proof can be found at Göbekli Tepe, an ancient temple discovered in Turkey that was built 13,000 years ago. You remember Göbekli Tepe, right? The temple, 6,500 years older than Stonehenge and 7,000 years older than the pyramids, is irrefutable proof that an advanced civilization existed. It's not even the only temple of its kind. There are other temples like it in Turkey of a similar age, like Karahan Tepe. It's confirmed, even by mainstream science, that a sophisticated civilization was in Turkey during the Ice Age. Now it's time for the bombshell, the thing I've been waiting for this whole video to shock you with. The mysterious civilization recorded the comet strike at Göbekli Tepe. A group of scientists from the University of Edinburgh's School of Engineering confirmed it. These were mainstream researchers who said, yes, it's true. The carvings within the ancient temple depict a comet strike occurring in approximately 10,950 BC. The scientists published their report in the International Journal of Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry. The pieces do seem to slide neatly into place. Maybe there was a global civilization that was completely wiped out by a comet-induced flood. But what about the future destruction I mentioned earlier? I don't want to freak anyone out, but we might all be about to die. Graham Hancock believes the comet that flooded the world 13,000 years ago came from the Taurid meteor stream. This cosmic belt contains millions of space rocks. Some of them are superheated pieces of debris up to 4 times larger than the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Hancock has claimed that the Taurid meteor stream will be crossing paths with Earth in 2030. It's possible there could be a repeat of the last disaster, once more wiping out humanity. The civilization with no religion. There was, at the dawn of civilization, a culture that built a true utopia. It's been more than 4,000 years, and no human society has come close to recreating the peace and harmony of the Indus Valley civilization. Scientists can't figure out how they did it. In the 1850s, after the British annexation of Punjab in India, a group of railroad workers stumbled upon an old ruin made of terracotta bricks at Harappa. The discovery spiraled into something that to this day defies explanation. It was the first recorded discovery of an Indus Valley ruin. Can you guess what happened to it? The terracotta bricks were taken away to be used in the railroad's construction, spread out across more than 100 miles of track between Multan and Lahore. This is exactly why we can't have nice ancient things. It wasn't until 1920 that foreign archaeologists became interested in the ruins found in India. At first, there was a lot of buzz surrounding a place 400 miles from Harappa known as the Mound of the Dead, or Mohenjo-daro. John Marshall of the Archaeological Survey of India participated in some of the earliest digs at Mohenjo-daro. He also investigated the pillaged ruins of Harappa, or at least what hadn't been carried away 70 years earlier. John was the one who realized Mohenjo-daro was linked to Harappa. It was a eureka moment, a bright light bulb flashing above his head. He had just discovered a massive civilization that pushed back India's history by thousands of years. Scientists now know about more than 1,000 sites belonging to the Indus Valley civilization, including 5 major urban hubs. Their territory stretched along the modern border of India and Pakistan for more than 900 miles. They controlled an area bigger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. It's crazy to think such a huge part of human history was lost until only a century ago. Each major city had upwards of 60,000 people living in it, and even though the cities were sometimes 400 miles apart, they didn't change much over thousands of years. Here's a fun comparison to blow your mind. The Indus Valley civilization reached their peak in 2700 BC, 50 years before the Egyptians built the first pyramid in the Saqqara necropolis. I haven't even gotten to the best part yet. As archaeologists slowly excavated city after city, they started to realize something was majorly wrong. They hadn't been finding any palaces. They didn't find any large funerary monuments. There were no splendid burials like the royal tombs in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. There were no palace mansions like those that the Minoans built on Crete. There were no fortifications or military outposts like what the Romans left behind in the deserts of North Africa. Most shocking of all is that to this day, archaeologists haven't found a single temple. Not a church, not a mosque, not a religious building of any kind. The Indus Valley civilization had no army, no religion, no monarchy, and no cultic funerary culture obsessed with the afterlife. Even without these things, which every other civilization in history had, the Indus Valley thrived. They had standardized road widths, they had a strong central government, they traded with nations far away, and they also grew enough food to support a massive urban population, all without fighting or worshipping. How did they do it? Historians, psychologists, archaeologists, all kinds of ologists have tried and failed to understand the world's only known utopia. It's not even clear what happened to the people. They vanished without a trace around 1900 BC. The civilization below the ice. If there was a global civilization prior to the flood, 13,000 years ago, like Graham Hancock says, how long did it last? You would think thousands of years, right? Isn't it possible a pre-flood civilization lived in Antarctica before the cold? And couldn't the remains of their society be hidden under more than a mile of solid ice today? Some experts are saying yes. Antarctica has been making big headlines lately with the controversy surrounding a humongous pyramid covered in snow. You may have seen images of the pyramid before, or heard me talk about it. Scientists say it's nothing but a mountain. Others say it's a real pyramid, like the Cholula pyramid in Mexico. It was also mistaken for a mountain for centuries. Sadly, most of the evidence suggesting humans lived in Antarctica is anecdotal. It's been suggested that Antarctica was the real Atlantis, and that the landmass was originally closer to Europe. Europe. Then, 13,000 years ago, Antarctica floated to the South Pole due to some tectonic activity. There's no proof of it, but it's still a fun take. I find it interesting that the supposed displacement of the continent happened at the same time as Graham Hancock's meteor strike. The oldest and most popular piece of evidence for civilization in Antarctica is the Piri Reis map. The map was drawn by an Ottoman sailor in 1513, showing the coastline of South America and an ice-free continent below it. Even though nobody had officially found Antarctica yet, this mysterious sailor drew it on a map. Clearly he knew about it, but why did he draw it without any ice? And how did a random sailor gain special knowledge that nobody else had? Could Antarctica really have been home to an ancient civilization? Let me know what you think in the comments.
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
The Caral Supe Civilization. Near the coast of Peru, there are huge mounds of stone and earth rising up from the sandy desert like natural formations. They almost look like crumbling hills made from hard stone. But in reality, these mounds are ancient pyramids from 5,000 years ago, standing in the remains of what might be the oldest urban center in the Americas. This mysterious site, known only as Caral, was studied by the Peruvian archaeologist Ruth Shady Solis from San Marcos University. The complex is over 150 acres of ruined pyramids, plazas, and residential buildings. It was once a thriving city at around the same time that the pyramids in Egypt were being constructed, making it one of the first advanced cities in the world. Ruth believes Caral is behind the mysterious origins of the Inca. The size and scope of the city is simply astounding. The biggest pyramid still standing, Pirámide Mayor, covers an area amassing to 4 football fields and stands 60 feet tall. It has more than 3 terraced levels and would have taken thousands of laborers and countless hours to build. By 1600 BC, the Caral civilization had spread through the Supe Valley and constructed at least 17 other pyramids. They were a massive civilization, but they vanished overnight. Even stranger is that they knew they were about to disappear. Many of their greatest architectural achievements were buried under heaps of dirt to protect them from whatever mysterious threat wiped them out. Ruth Solis also believes the Caral civilization was the mother city of the Incan civilization. She thinks it's possible that the Inca began in the city of Caral, but after its destruction went somewhere else. Then, after several centuries, they were able to regroup to form the Inca Empire. The Indus Utopia. For over 700 years, the Indus civilization was a utopia. In the Indus Valley of India, this great culture flourished at the dawn of humanity beginning roughly 5,000 years ago. They were one of the first advanced civilizations, building huge cities with upwards of 40,000 residents each. One of their greatest settlements was the city of Mohenjo-Daro, a place that boasted sewage systems, household plumbing, standardized currency, and strong trade links across the globe. Currency from the Indus Valley has been found as far away as the Middle East, proving Mohenjo-Daro became rich by trading with other mighty empires. At their prime, they covered much of Pakistan, India, and parts of Afghanistan. But what makes the people of the Indus civilization so unique is that researchers say they never practiced war. They were a utopia, a peaceful group of humans who didn't follow any dictators or kings, and who never fashioned a single weapon or marched into a single battle. We know this because although archaeologists have excavated multiple cities belonging to the Indus people, they haven't found even one palace or temple. Every city has shown evidence of the residents sharing almost the exact same amount of wealth. Nobody ruled over anybody else in a great big castle, and there appear to have been no temples dedicated to strange deities. As far as anyone can tell, the Indus civilization had no kings and lived peaceful lives in harmony with their neighbors. However, that tranquility ended about 4,000 years ago when the civilization collapsed overnight. Some experts say climate change played a role, while others claim their unwillingness to go to war left them vulnerable to be conquered. The Etruscans. Before there were Romans, there were Etruscans. Some of the first kings of Rome came from Etruria, as well as highly advanced knowledge that helped the Romans succeed in conquering much of the world. For decades, scientists have tried to figure out who the Etruscans were and where exactly they came from. In the 5th century BC, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote that they came from a faraway land and migrated to the Italian peninsula thousands of years prior. However, a recent genetic survey has confirmed that the Etruscans, in fact, came from Italy. The DNA from over 82 people who lived between the years 800 BC and 1000 AD shows that Etruscans lived in Italy before anyone else. Even more interesting is that they were almost genetically identical to their neighbors in Rome. The Etruscans were unique because for hundreds of years, as people migrated throughout Europe and populations mixed and merged, they remained widely undisturbed in Italy. They ruled a massive amount of land between Rome and Florence, along with the island of Corsica. They also had their own distinct language that was different from other European languages like Greek. But according to Ben Turner from Life Science, the Etruscans just couldn't hold off against the Romans and were beaten down in the 3rd century BC. By 90 BC, Etruria had been completely assimilated into the Roman Republic. The advanced architecture, artistic styles, and even Etruscan culture were all absorbed and then used by the Romans. To this day, scientists don't understand why the Etruscans lasted so long, or how they came to be defeated by their small neighbors to the south. The old copper culture. Some of the first people in the world to start manipulating copper were Native Americans. About 10,000 years ago, near the Great Lakes, the old copper culture began to fashion objects out of pure copper. It was a major technological triumph for Native Americans, seeing as copper was a huge boost above ordinary stone. They were able to mine copper, then transform the raw material into extraordinarily sharp arrowheads for hunting. But then something strange happened. After thousands of years as coppersmiths, the Native Americans stopped and returned to making tools out of stone and bone. They went backwards, and nobody can quite figure out why. The old copper culture isn't exactly a civilization, but a group of people from the Great Lakes region identified based on archaeological finds from between 7500 and 1000 BC. The people of this culture learned very early how to smelt copper and practice metal casting in the western Great Lakes. They practiced a nomadic existence and relied on hunting and fishing. However, after they started to produce metal tools, they stopped after 3,000 years. It seemed like they gave up making copper instruments and started only using the metal for things like beads and bracelets. This has archaeologists scratching their heads because it's the opposite of what other cultures did. When European cultures figured out how to make copper, they kept experimenting with the technology and became more and more advanced. But the Native Americans in the Great Lakes went the other way. They used copper for a bit, then went back to the old-fashioned rock and bone. The Ban Chiang culture, the oldest Bronze Age culture in the world, may have developed in Thailand. Excavations at the small village of Ban Chiang in northeast Thailand revealed evidence of prehistoric bronze forging dating back to roughly 3000 BC. This is shocking because it shows that the ancient people of Thailand were the first to cross from the Stone Age into the Bronze Age, more than 1,000 years before the Middle East. This discovery flipped everything we know about world history on its head. Up until that point, Turkey and Iran were considered the first places in the world to enter the Bronze Age. However, it seems a small group of ingenious people dwelling in the Thai jungle figured it out first. These were people who migrated into Thailand about 20,000 years ago. They became one of the oldest rice-based civilizations, cultivating rice starting around 3500 BC. There was such an abundance of food that the Ban Chiang culture never really had to worry about famines. This allowed the ancient Thai people to focus on other things, like the development of metals. Still, it wouldn't be for another 2,000 years that real kingdoms began to rise in Thailand. At the end of the first millennium BC, tribal territories started merging with one another to create proto-historical kingdoms. These kingdoms would ultimately lead to the development of the Dvaravati culture in the 9th century AD, and soon after, the mighty kingdoms of ancient Thailand. The Persian Empire. The Persian civilization was the most scientific of all the civilizations on Earth during their reign. Persia, or modern-day Iran, was occupied by little more than sheep herders and nomadic tribes 2,500 years ago. However, the leader of one of those tribes, Cyrus the Great, began marching against other tribes, forcing them to join his kingdom under one rule. By the year 550 BC, he had conquered Media, Lydia, and Babylon, in turn forming the powerful Achaemenid Empire. This really was the first superpower. Cyrus the Great had managed to collect 3 of the most important human civilizations under one government. He had Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley in Egypt, and the Indus Valley in India. Not only did the Persians have the largest army the world had ever seen, but they also had highly advanced technology. They mastered the technique of building natural refrigerators by 400 BC, which were called yakchal, and could be used to keep food cold even in the heat of the desert. They came up with sulfuric acid, discovered by Persian astronomer Abu Bakr Muhammad, and today it's used to make everything from fertilizer to detergent. The Persians also invented backgammon, the postal service, and the concept of basic human rights. An earthenware goblet found in an ancient Persian city, an artifact depicting a series of goat drawings, is the first example of animation in the world. The goat jumps toward a tree and eats its leaves when the goblet is turned in the proper direction, making the Persians, not Walt Disney, the real pioneers of animation. The Naqadan culture. Before the ancient Egyptians ruled the lands of the Nile and built great pyramids, there was the Naqadan civilization. In 4500 BC, they became the predominant culture in Upper Egypt, operating out of a capital city named Naqada. The civilization was made up of individual villages, with each village boasting its own animal deity. The primitive kingdom was divided based on which animal was worshipped, and this was the beginning for what would become the dominant religion of ancient Egypt for thousands of years. As you may already know, the Egyptian gods were mostly based on animals. These animal deities began as primitive gods over 1,000 years before Egypt was unified into one country. The Naqada also buried their dead loved ones with small statuettes to keep them company in the afterlife. These were some of the earliest grave goods and the precursor for the wildly complex burial rituals of the ancient Egyptians. As the civilization continued to advance and develop more complicated artistic tendencies, things began to change. By 3000 BC, Upper and Lower Egypt were divided in half. Upper Egypt worshipped Horus and Nekhbet, while Lower Egypt worshipped Set and Wadjet. After a great and terrible war, Upper Egypt defeated Lower Egypt and unified the country as one. And that was when the great civilization of ancient Egypt was truly born. The Neolithic Boyan culture. The Neolithic Boyan culture appeared in southern Romania roughly 7,000 years ago, and they were one of the first human groups to build settlements in Eastern Europe. The culture was characterized by unique terrace settlements. They began by building mud huts, but over thousands of years, they upgraded to more complex settlements. Their biggest achievement was constructing what archaeologists say could be the first fortified settlements in Romania, which was a major turning point in civilization. They were also the first to introduce copper axes. This was a big deal because it showed forward thinking and ingenuity. The Boyan culture lasted until their demise in 3500 BC, when they started venturing north along the Black Sea and encountered the Neolithic Hamangia culture. The Hamangia culture was bigger and stronger, and they eventually absorbed the Boyan. What happened next was one of the biggest steps in the evolution of society. These two Neolithic cultures, really no more than primitive hunters who managed to build mud huts and wooden walls, formed the Cucuteni Trypillian culture. They then became the biggest human civilization in Eastern Europe. They were only destroyed when a rival civilization from the east invaded their territory, and scholars believe the Cucuteni Trypillian culture was most likely absorbed. Looking at this today, we can really see what happened here. Each small culture was absorbed by a bigger one until about 5,000 years ago, when true civilizations began to rise in Europe. Teotihuacan civilization. 30 miles from Mexico City is the capital of the Teotihuacan culture. It's believed to be named after the mysterious city of Teotihuacan, which was settled around 400 BC. By the time the Aztecs came across the city in the 15th century, the culture was already dead and gone. The city had been abandoned since at least 400 AD and had already been empty for 1,000 years before the Aztecs came across it. They didn't know why it had been abandoned, and it must have seemed like a huge mystery to them. They didn't know anything about the culture or origins of Teotihuacan, and in all honesty, we still don't. Modern archaeologists have speculated, but nobody has ever made any official proclamations. Some believe that the Toltec civilization built the huge city, but that's likely incorrect because the Toltec didn't arrive on the scene until Teotihuacan was already dead. Others suggest the Totonac tribe may have built and lived in the city. The Maya, the Mixtec, and even the Zapotec have also been brought up in discussion as being responsible. But the truth is that the mysterious culture who created this place is unknown. We do know they were wildly advanced, had a population of about 200,000 people, and yet they abandoned their pyramids, plazas, and great structures seemingly for no reason. It was almost as if they were all abducted by aliens at the same time. The Aegean civilizations. In the classical world of the Mediterranean, from between 3000 and 1200 BC, there were three main civilizations on the coast of the Aegean Sea. These civilizations thrived in what is now considered Greece, but it wasn't exactly Greeks who lived here. There were the Cycladic, the Minoan, and the Mycenaean civilizations. We know there was a ruling class in each of these cultures. The upper class lived in massive palaces, and the cities didn't really have much of a defense system. Most of the cities were built on islands. The economy was centered around commerce, and they were highly skilled artists. Interestingly, most of the stories from Greek mythology come from earlier stories told by these particular civilizations. Sadly, each of these civilizations fell in rapid succession. The Minoans were obliterated by a volcano, and the Cycladic peoples were disrupted by tsunamis and pirates. Then the Mycenaeans were killed off in 1200 BC by the Sea People, a mysterious race of seafarers who pillaged the remains of the Aegean civilizations. It wasn't for another 400 years until ancient Greece as we know it would emerge. Thanks for watching! Which of these ancient civilizations do you think was the most advanced for their time? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. See you next time! Bye!